what do you think how biases play a role in a company, right? And how to handle such biases? Just give a view so that we can build our thoughts on that.
Sure, sure. So, giving my own example, I have had the good fortune and privilege of working for some very good companies, including Nestle, British Airways, both from a manufacturing standpoint and also in the services industry. And when I joined the current organization, which is Sun Mobility, which is essentially into battery swapping, uh, I myself really had to do a lot of unlearning. Experience also becomes a hindrance, shall we say, in terms of looking at things afresh. So for me also, it was a huge challenge to adapt to the working style of a new organization who was wanting to disrupt the market, right, and create a path-making technology wherein vis-a-vis a structured approach as far as processes and systems were concerned. And like I said, therefore biases are more leaning of the mind. They may be positive and negative. And you are correct that, one needs to really constantly challenge and evaluate from all perspectives whether the decisions that we are making are really sound and in the correct sort of reflection of the present situation. So that is what I would like to say, and then further I'll add on. How about your views?
I think the first thing is there has to be a level of acceptance, right? Biases are reality. It happens at home, it happens in the social environments that we live in, it happens in the corporate all the time, right? And I think before we start fixing and addressing the problem, there has to be a level of acknowledgement and acceptance of the problem. Many a times I've experienced that the moment you talk about biases, it's in a negative connotation. Think about it, as a management student, I probably learned about the classic definitions of biases like Halo's effect and Horn's effect and stuff like that back in the school. But look at a normal average manager who comes up the ranks, right? The person is really not aware of what could be the biases, where can it come up, and many of these are in the unconscious, right? The person is not even aware of the biases, and we try to fix the problem at the tail end of it, and many a times it's a punitive measure, right? So my starting point would be, it has to start with acknowledgement and awareness, and realize that biases can go way beyond let's say behavioral biases, right? You have let's say confirmation bias to a whole lot of other biases that could come in. And if we can start accepting, acknowledging that, then I think we go to having a more systematic and structured approach to addressing those.
So just to comment on this, for instance, when you say acceptance, the problem is that we have never been trained to understand that we are actually carrying biases. If you, for instance, talk about this author called Daniel Kahneman, who talks about system 1 and system 2 thinkings, right? Normally, we are so much into system 1 that we never realize that system 2 is also equally important.
Correct.
Right? The way we have been taught in schools, the way we have been trained in universities or institutes, and later when we work, we never try to question and challenge, which is actually the basics of what we call critical thinking, to challenge biases. So I guess that is also a reason that we never understand what our bias is, and because we don't understand, we don't accept, right? But as Mr. Aparnesh has rightly said, that when you know your biases and you challenge them, obviously it makes a huge difference in your workplace, as he was sharing his experience. Meenakshi ma'am, what do you think about it? Like, what is your view on it?
I think the first is, and I'll just possibly build on what you guys have said, right? I think a lot of psychology students would possibly connect with this, right? But how do we grow up as human beings? When you're born, you don't know that's fire, and if you touch it, you will get burnt. There's something called schema and construct. So before you even get to biases, let's understand how does our psychology evolve, right? So schema and construct, you go through an experience, so somebody tells you that is fire, that is hot, don't touch it, you will get burnt. Four-legged animal could be a dog or a cow, but you start differentiating. Yeah? So what makes us learn and evolve and actually makes us very successful over a period of time is our schemas and constructs that we build. That gives us our intuition.
It's a lot of sense, yes.
If you don't have intuition, you wouldn't succeed. If you don't learn this, you wouldn't grow as human beings. When intuition goes to the other side, where you start strongly holding beliefs, either consciously or unconsciously, it creates a bias, which could be positive or negative. Right? So I think for me, it is very deeply to be understood that every human being grows up a certain way and you succeed a certain way. And certain reinforcement happens of things that makes you who you are. And we give it a name as a bias, and as you rightly said, oftentimes it has a very negative connotation. And the moment you start talking about something with so much of negativity, there's a defensive approach to it that comes in, right? Because the person is forced to defend a particular position. But if you were to sort of really flip it to say that this is what our strength is, because you hire people all the time in corporates, and we all know that, where people say, I want the person with same experience, right? There is merit to it. And when you have all of the same experiences, there's less innovation. That's known. And that there are many case studies in business and world that you will talk about, and you'll ask us, we'll talk about it. But I think fundamentally, to me, there's very limited understanding of genesis of why somebody is how they are. And there's a lot more judgment lens to it than actually understanding to move the needle today, is my reflection on bias.
Soma ma'am, you want to comment on it?
Yeah, very similar to what Meenakshi was saying, that actually pattern recognition is what helps human beings succeed. But when the pattern recognition leads to stereotyping, and it leads to judgments, and it leads to these knee-jerk reactions to seeing someone or something, it tends to be more disruptive and dysfunctional than functional. I think for me, my personal experience about bias was very early in my career. So as HR, you do a lot of interviews and you're constantly selecting people, and I used to pride myself that within 4 seconds I know whether this person is going to succeed in this company or not. And it was almost a sense of pride I had that I know it. My gut tells me this person has walked in and I can tell whether they're going to work with me or not. But over time then, I actually attended a workshop on competency-based interviewing. This is back in the day when it was all the craze. And I failed the class because I just couldn't follow the methodology. Because in my gut, I was like, I don't care what you're teaching me. I'm telling you this person will work, this will not work. But then that kind of brought me to the fact that unless you consciously start observing behaviors, noting down behaviors, and challenging what your gut has initially said, you will never come out of it and take a good decision. So I agree with all of things that are being said. Is bias bad? Not in itself. Bias is what helps us succeed because it's an outcome of our intelligence. But once you use the word bias, you're putting a person on defensive and it's making it worse and they don't even want to come and challenge it, right? So the first thing is to open people's mind to say that it's a normal thing. We all have biases because we've all had experiences. And then to start to say, now look at what might be working for you and what might not be working for you.
I completely agree with Meenakshi also and with you also. As you have told, I guess Meenakshi was saying that, and if I use the established author like Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who has written a famous book called The Black Swan, he very clearly states that our brain is a predictive machine. It loves to capture information, and with that information, it tries to predict our future, right? Or about objects around us or about people around us. So if we stick to the same way of thinking and drawing inferences, obviously those patterns create problems. So the idea is definitely brain helps. It creates schemas which help us in arriving at conclusions. At the same time, we also have to understand that using same schemas for everybody would not work. So sometimes we will have to tinker a few patterns which our brain is sharing with us. And as Soma was rightly saying, the gut, whenever there is a gut call, as I was mentioning gut Geigerenzer initially also, it's our responsibility to check whether this gut is something very random as a conclusion, or we can logically also arrive at this conclusion. And that's how we have to differentiate between gut and bias, right? If you can logically arrive at that conclusion, obviously it is gut, and it can be actually a way out to handle a particular situation or a particular person.